All right, I'm back for the second of three videos on your essay number 5, which is the persuasive essay. In the last video, I accidentally said essay number 6, but it's number 5. I sent you in an email and through Moodle, both, I sent this assignment sheet that before you go any further with the video, you should pause and print it out if you haven't already, because we're going to be referring to it. All right. So, as usual, this pretty much explains what I want in some detail, so please read it carefully. I'm going to go over some of it here. The opening paragraph says, driving while text messaging or talking on the phone significantly increases the likelihood of an accident. You've heard about this, I'm sure. The impact of cell phones and other electronic devices on driver safety has made people aware of the broader issue of distracted driving, right? So, in the past 20 years or so, since people have begun using cell phones while they're in a car, we've begun to notice that people get distracted and it's dangerous. But of course, there have always been reasons why people have gotten distracted while driving. Fiddling with their clothes or food or the radio, or staring at something out the window, yelling at the kids in the back seat, or whatever, right? So this is not just about texting while driving. This is a topic about distracted driving in general. Next sentence says, the thesis of your persuasive essay should answer this question: what, if anything, should be done to address the problem of distracted driving? So there's your assigned topic. Why don't you underline that sentence? The thesis of your persuasive essay should answer this question, etc. Underline that so you don't forget about that. And notice that I'm not asking a pro or con question, right? I'm asking for you to propose a solution. And because, distracted driving, there are any number of possible maybe we shouldn't call them solutions, but ways to address the problem. And your paper will take on one of them. You're not going to single-handedly solve the problem of distracted driving with your paper, but you can, as I said in the last video, persuade people and maybe move them somewhat along that spectrum closer to your views. Okay. Second paragraph says, as you might imagine, much has already been written on this topic, and arguments about important public matters often make references to what others have already said. So in other words, they often talk about, a conversation happening in the culture. Right now there's a massive conversation happening in our culture about the COVID-19 virus, right? And when there's, a topic that lots of people are talking about, you, an individual, can step in and kind of have your say. So when you're writing a persuasive paper on a topic that's about some matter of public importance, it's a very good idea to find out what other people have said so that you can kind of enter into the conversation knowing what's currently being said or believed on the topic, right? So this paper is not a research paper, but it is what we in the English department, call a documented essay. That means you're going to use sources, but it's not a research paper because you don't have to do the research. I'm giving you the sources. You can see there are 5 titles here, 5 newspaper and magazine articles that you can read and get background from, and you can use in your paper. I'm requiring you, in the middle of the second paragraph, I said, cite, either quoting or paraphrasing, from 2 or 3 of these articles in your essay. I'd like you to underline that as well. From the word cite to the end of the sentence. Cite, either quoting or paraphrasing from 2 or 3 of them in your essay. Okay? So this is not going to be a research paper. You're not going to be reporting what other people say. That's not going to be the goal of the paper, is not to report what other people say. The goal is to make a proposal that you defend and support, but then you're bringing in 2 or 3 quotes or other facts that you've gotten from your reading. Okay, so we're learning kind of baby steps for a research paper, an academic research paper. You're going to be given these 5 articles from magazines and newspapers, right? I've printed them out. They're electronic, but I've printed my copies out so I can refer to them while I'm grading your papers. You're being given that, so you don't have to research it. You read it and you quote from it as you would in a research paper, but it's not really a research paper. Okay. So you probably want to read those articles first and find out what other people have said before you come up with your own proposal. And then, you want to find a topic that is worth arguing, something that's again, not going to solve the problem, but will help alleviate the problem, right? It'll change things for the better. And you want it to be, a realistic argument. You don't, I guess I'm thinking of a few years ago, I had a student who said that what we could do to keep people from driving distracted is you'd have on the steering wheel 2 grips, and if either one of the person's hands ever came off of one of those grips, they would get an electric shock in the seat that they were sitting on. And maybe that would work, but it's not going to happen because for a lot of reasons, Americans are not going to put up with that. It'd be expensive, and we couldn't mandate that people have this in their car. It'd be dangerous because people getting shocked would get in accidents, etc. Right? And anybody who voted for that law would be thrown out of office. And my friends, even though I've put a do not disturb on, I think I'm getting texts from my friends here. Sorry about all the dinging. All right. So on the second side of the page, the first full paragraph I talked about is that I talked about that you usually don't use first person in an academic essay, and the way you do that in a persuasive paper is you don't state something as being your opinion, you just state it, right? Instead of saying, I think that a ban on cell phones is an infringement of basic freedoms, say instead, a ban on cell phones is an infringement on basic freedoms. It has more force that way. When you put I think on it, you're taking the focus off of the topic and putting it on you. And also it weakens your argument by making it more obviously kind of a matter of opinion. Okay. Great. So there are other things on the assignment sheet that I'm going to talk about in the next video. They have to do with finding and using the sources that I'm giving you. But first, I want to talk with you about I have a couple other things, revisions that I wanted to make to this after I sent you the topic sheet. I thought of some other important things. You might want to, jot some of this down because it might make your paper, your first draft stronger, and I won't have to tell you this on your first paper. First of all, this essay that you're writing should be a single proposal, right? You want to propose one single thing that you argue in depth. You don't want to have 5 different, 6 different proposals that you kind of mention and support just a little bit. You want something that you can go into in depth. It's easy to write a paper that just kind of skims the surface. A college level piece of writing should go into depth, right? Okay, that's one revision I wanted to make. A second one is that make sure that the thing you're proposing, it doesn't really make sense to propose something that already exists. Like, we should make texting while driving illegal. It already is in many states, right? You could say that, we should make it illegal nationwide, but, it's like arguing that we should have seatbelts in cars. Well, we already do. So it should propose something that will make a difference in the problem, not something that in the past already made a difference in the problem. Your solution could be that, something that already exists is going to be legally mandated. Some kind of technology that already exists would be mandated in every car or something like that. All right, let's talk about the topic itself a little bit. First of all, if we're talking about solutions to the problem of distracted driving, it's useful to analyze a topic that you're going to be writing on. Analyzing, of course, meaning breaking it down into its parts. What do we mean by distractions? We kind of know what we mean, but if we stop and we think about what kinds of distractions there are, it's useful. Well, first of all, there are visual distractions, right? The eyes. When you're texting while driving, you're not looking at the road, at least not all the time, right? And that's, your eyes are distracted, and your eyes are important for driving, obviously. Another kind of distraction is what they call manual distraction, which means your hands are occupied doing something other than driving. Right? You're adjusting the radio dial, or texting or something like that. Trying to take your sweater off, right? So you hold the steering wheel with your knees while you're taking your sweater off or something. And then there is, maybe most importantly of all, but easy to overlook, mental distraction, right? Your mind can be distracted. And so all three of these are worth addressing. Some things like texting are dangerous because your eyes are on the phone instead of on the road, your hands are on the phone instead of the wheel, and your mind is absorbed in talking to somebody rather than paying attention to the traffic, right? So that's three different kinds of distraction, and it's dangerous. All right. So think about that when you're when you're coming up with your solution. There are also three different kinds of solutions, as I see it. Seems to me that nearly all solutions can fall into one of three categories. One would be a legal solution, right? In other words, the law. Are you going to make some change in the law? Are you going to make it, a person who gets caught texting while driving will have their license revoked or something like that, right? A $1,000 fine or something like that. You could have a technological solution. There are lots of those. Some kind of, technology, some mechanical thing that would either be in the car or on the phone or, whatever, some kind of, I don't know, what, something that would shock you if you're falling asleep or something like that. And then the third category is a little bit broad. I would just, I guess, call it cultural. Changing people's beliefs and attitudes and so forth. This one is um, maybe you'd say beliefs and habits. Um, this one is the hardest to change, probably. How do you change people's attitudes? Well, the law can help to change people's attitudes, I guess, and technology might and so forth. But, you know, um, they often make a comparison between um, distracted driving and seatbelt use in cars, right? Seatbelts used to be, well, there didn't used to be seatbelts, and then there were seatbelts, but they were just kind of optional and they were a novelty. And then um, eventually they became legally mandated, but people wouldn't use them; they would just sit on them. But through advertising and the threat of ticketing and so forth, um, we've made it pretty. The use of seatbelts is pretty widespread now. Almost everybody, when they get in the car without really thinking about it, puts on a seatbelt. And if you don't, and you have kids, your kids are going to say, "Oh, put on your seatbelt." Um, so it's definitely part of the culture now. It's part of what we believe we should do. Another thing that people often compare distracted driving to is drunk driving, because it has to do with driving, but also it's something that the culture's attitude has changed towards. The culture's changed its attitudes towards drunk driving. It is no longer thought to be cool as it was when I was in high school in the 70s, where kids would, maybe, I don't know, maybe kids still do brag about their drunk driving, but most people don't think that's so cool anymore, right? And that's made a difference. So culture can change, but that's hard to do. You do it through, you know, what they call PSAs, public service announcements, those ads and commercials that are supposed to tell you, how to live your life and so forth. Um, and other things that can, other kinds of education, like crucially, I guess, in driver's education, there could be some curriculum that's pushed so that everybody who goes through driver's training gets this same kind of instruction about some aspect of distracted driving. All right, a few a few kind of established facts or talking points on this topic that are worth your knowing. Um, One is about multitasking, which we've actually talked about earlier when we were talking about, um, you know, what is it you do while you're writing your paper. Scientists who've studied multitasking have determined that multitasking is a myth, right? When people think that they're multitasking, they're not really doing two things at once. They're doing two things and two things simultaneously, but they're switching back and forth between the two. Your mind, the front part of your brain called the prefrontal cortex, it can only focus on one thing at a time. It's like a beam of light. You can point it here or you can point it there, but you can't really split it, right? Almost like your vision too. You can look at one thing here, you can look at another thing here, but you can't really look at either of them or both of them at the same time. So when people think that they're multitasking while they're driving, anything that distracts your hands, your eyes, or your mind interferes somewhat with your ability to drive well. So um, um, that's an important fact to keep in mind. Another important fact to keep in mind is that some things, I'm going to contradict what I just said here, some things um, can be done while you're occupied doing something else if the behavior that you're doing is so well rehearsed that it's automatic. You can chew gum while you're driving a car. You can sing along to the radio while you're driving the car. You can walk down the street while you're talking to somebody. Both of those are complex behaviors, but walking is so automatic that you can do it without thinking, right? But in most cases, when you're talking about something that you're doing while you're driving, many of them are too distracting. You can't really, you have to, if it's something you have to think about, then you can't do it while you're driving, right? You can't read while you're driving. You can't type while you're driving. You know, I've seen people going down the expressway, shaving, or putting on eye makeup, or somebody with a newspaper spread out over the steering wheel, doing all kinds of things, right? So multitasking is a myth. Another thing to keep in mind is, conversations, and we talk about hands-free technology. People think, my phone is a Bluetooth phone and it's voice controlled. It's not dangerous to use. Well, your hands are not occupied and your eyes are not occupied, but your mind is still occupied with hands-free telephone conversations. And it's a strange thing, but a fact that when you're having a conversation, studies have shown this, that when you're having a conversation with somebody in the car, it's far less distracting than if you're having a conversation with somebody outside of the car, somebody on the phone. And they're not sure exactly why that is. The best guess is that when you're talking to somebody in the car, you can just talk to them. But when you talk to somebody on the phone, part of your mind is working to imagine that person because they're not actually there. And that imagination occupies your attention. Strangely, they did a study where they had somebody talking on a cell phone while they're driving, and the person on the other end said that they were just a few blocks away at the gas station. They did it with the same experiment with somebody who claimed to be several miles away, and then someone else who claimed to be all the way in Chicago or something. And the strange thing is that the farther away the person on the phone claimed to be, the more it interfered with the person's driving, and that's hard to understand. But these are things that they're discovering, is that different experiences are distracting, whether somebody wants them to be or not. Certain things just don't seem to be. Listening to the radio, not very distracting. Fussing around looking for a particular radio station can be. But this is another complicating factor here. If we made a law that there could be no distractions, we have to take all stereos out of cars. It's going to be illegal to talk to anyone in the car. It's illegal to eat in the car. Your hands have to be on the wheel at all times. Your eyes have to be staring straight ahead. What would happen if we made laws like that is there would be all kinds of crashes because people would get so fatigued that they would crash, right? So some distractions are actually good. In other words, some degree of distraction. In order to keep the human brain alert, it needs breaks from focusing on just one thing all the time, right? So it's actually useful to have the radio playing or somebody in the car that you can chat with, or even just daydreaming, right? Those are all distracting, but they help you achieve that balance between, you know, complete boredom to where you fall asleep or fall into a trance, or total distraction on the other hand, right? You need some kind of balance. So that's a complication. Um, Another fact is that um, many countries and some states already do ban texting while driving, um, but texting bans on texting um, are very hard um, to police, to enforce. It's not easy for the police to tell whether somebody is using their cell phone to text or for the GPS or for what, you know. And when you're pulled over and the cop asks, "Were you texting?" You could just say, "No, I was, looking at my GPS," or "My phone was off. I was just looking at it," or something like that. Um, you know, Police are not allowed um, to take your cell phone and you know explore what it was you were doing. That's violation of your privacy. So those laws, if you want to say we should just have make it illegal to text while driving, how do you enforce it? Um, that might be, if you could think of a good way to enforce it, that might be a good argument. Um, if you ban cell phones altogether, that's something that could be enforceable because then the police could report that you had a cell phone in your hand, and the law could state that you're not allowed to um, have your hand on a cell phone while you're driving, something like that. Another approach, um, aside from the law or technology, um, could be insurance incentives. Sometimes those can function kind of like the law, right? Because the insurance company has its rules about if you install this device or this app on your phone, then we give you a 10% discount on your rates or something like that. I saw somebody propose that was not a student, but I saw this published. Somebody proposed that insurance companies should um, be allowed to not pay for any accidents that happen when the person was shown to have been using their cell phone when the accident happened, or texting while the accident happened, something like that. Which sounds like, oh, that's a good idea. That would stop it, right? But then what that would do is it would financially destroy some people who got into accidents, um, and potentially the person that they got into the accident with. Um, there are possible solutions, but it has to be one that might actually come about, right? We could say um, we could propose that there be capital punishment for somebody who uses a cell phone while driving, and that would probably bring the rate of cell phone use while driving way down. But that would that would never happen in America because they would never make a law like that. The people who um, would have to make that law would be voted out of office, and people just wouldn't have it, right? So again, it has to be something realistic that you're proposing. Um, yeah, another set of things here is, um, you know, to some extent, we've been trained by our devices so that we now think differently about the world, right? We're so used to being interacting with our devices most times and in most situations, um, so it's hard to put them aside when we're driving. And cell phones are actually a tool, and they can be useful for driving. They can be useful for GPS. They can be useful for music that can help to keep you attentive while you're driving, etc. Um, and we're so used to interacting with an electronic device that you know we our threshold for tolerating um, boredom is very low, right? We can't tolerate boredom. We have to have some kind of stimulation. Um, and also, um, you know, we expect to be available by phone all the time, or by phone we mean a telephone conversation or text. Um, and if someone proposes that it would be illegal to use your phone while you're driving, which is, that is the law in many countries, and a lot of countries think we're crazy for not having that law. If using a cell phone while you're driving was just strictly outlawed, um, you know, people would think about their cell phones differently from how they do. Right now, they're just sort of addicted to that, and you know, we have, as I said, this expectation that we're always available. Um, Students sometimes write in their papers that they have to have their cell phones, have to be able to use their cell phones because what if it's an emergency? And I guess I want to know what the emergency is that requires you to use your phone. Um, I think it would be very, very unusual that there would be an emergency that would require you to use your phone while you're still driving. Um, Maybe, if you said, um, the brakes on my car have gone out and I can't stop the car. Maybe that's the only one I can think of. You know, Almost any kind of emergency you can imagine, you can pull over and make a phone call. Emergencies usually don't leave you still rolling in your car. Maybe if you had somebody really injured in the car and you're taking them to the hospital, you call ahead to the hospital. I guess, but the thing is that if you make an exception like that, the phone can always be, like say you propose some technological fix, like an app that disables the phone as soon as the car is in motion. Well, then the student will say, well, and then there needs to be something that you can do to override that if there's an emergency. Well, as soon as you can override it for an emergency, then you can just override it and say it's an emergency. So then the system doesn't work. Um, yeah, there's another thing about that. What was it? Oh yeah. Um, Sometimes students say if you want to use your phone, you should pull over to the side and use your phone. Well, yeah. If you see when you're on the expressway or on the street and you see how many drivers are using their phone, um, what would happen if they pulled over to the side when they were using their phone? That's actually pretty dangerous to have a lot of people pulling off to the side of the road and then pulling back on. That doesn't seem like a good solution. So I'll just say that up front before anybody proposes that in the paper. Um, it's a problematic solution. All right. Is there anything else? Maybe, but that's what I can think of right now, and that's what my notes tell me. So then there will be a third video. Um, that'll probably be, it might be again tonight, but it'll probably be tomorrow. And that one will be on accessing and using the sources. Your assignment sheet explains how to access the sources. And if you follow those instructions, they're about 2 or 3 sentences long. If you follow them just as I've written them, it will work. But the next video will explain to you and show you with an iPad how it works. All right. See you then.